Hi there, my name is Matthew Quilliam and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. In this video we're going to be talking about comping on the banjolele. I'm using my Duke 10 banjolele and we're going to be talking about different styles of comping. So early jazz with a lot of sort of tenor banjo in that kind of style, and then also looking at some modern ukulele comping techniques as well. Comping is the jazz slang, if you like, for accompanying. So to comp someone, you're comping. And there are various different places that you may find yourself doing comping. You may be accompanying just a singer, or you may be appearing in a larger ensemble, maybe a little jazz band or a wider jazz group, such as a Dixieland setup or a big band or something like that. It's important to be able to have a variety of different tools, if you like, in order to vary up your comping depending on not only the setting that you're in, how many musicians you're playing with, but also the mood of the song as well. So we're going to dive right in with a few techniques. The first point to talk about is the distinction between playing staccato and leaving the strings open to ring. Now there's a great banjo player called Don Vappy who uses and draws upon a lot of the old-time early jazz banjo techniques in his playing. If you haven't heard of him, then do check him out. And he once told me a great piece of advice, that if you've got a piano in the band, then you should stick to staccato chords like this. But without a piano, then you should let the strings ring. That's because the piano, especially with its famous sustain pedal, has a very ringy sound already, and sometimes the banjo can sort of interfere a bit with the piano. So whenever I'm playing in my band, such as the Dixie Six or the Guatemalan Soufflé Patrol, I will always make sure that if the pianist is there, I'll be playing staccato. But if I'm accompanying just a singer, maybe it's me and either myself singing or another singer, then I'll be sure to let the strings ring out open a bit more, because I've now got the space to be able to do so. Or if I'm playing in a band and there's a reduced rhythm section, then I'll let the banjo ring out for a little bit more. What comes with this staccato or not playing is the way you voice your chords. For example, the famous turnaround D7, G7, C. We all know those chords, and they're very popular in all sorts of music, but especially early jazz. Now, if you're going to be playing staccato, well, one of the ways we can dampen the strings is by releasing the pressure in our left hand. So we take a chord, but we're then able to cut the sound immediately and cut off the sound before it naturally rings. So we don't want this, we want this. And the way we produce this sound is we take a chord, such as take this D7 bar chord, and you simply release the pressure when you want the sound to be cut off. You're not taking the finger completely off, because then you get that sort of ghost ringing. It's got to be nice and crisp. Release the pressure so your fingers are still on, and if you were to strum again with this released pressure, then you get a dead sound. Just like that. Now it's easier to play in this staccato style that is so popular with early jazz banjo if we're playing bar chords, or chords that cover all four of the strings. For example, if we go to our other D7, sometimes known as the Hawaiian D7, and then we apply that same technique of doing the little damp, well, half the strings aren't covered by our fingers, they're still going to continue ringing. So it doesn't really make a difference if I'm releasing the pressure or not. You can mute the other strings with your spare fingers, but I think it's much easier to just play that D7, and then it's a much crisper sound as well. You get a nicer sort of control over the sound. So you want to be looking for voicings of chords that cover all four strings if you're doing the staccato playing. So D7, I would use this one. Then I would either use this G7 and have my thumb ready over here to damp the G string, or more commonly I'll probably use this G7 up here. And then the C chord would be this one as well. It's like our infamous B flat, but moved up to, or you can bar it like that as well. Doesn't really make a difference. You can get that short, snappy, crisp sound. So therefore, with jazz staccato comping, I'd be playing something like this. Whereas if I was to leave the strings ringing, then by all means play those more open chord shapes. The open chords with minimal fingers lets the strings ring out. The open strings ring out a lot better. So you've got to watch your voicings there and work out. Find some different voicings up the neck as well, and really make sure that you're getting the effect that you're after. Now when we're comping, it can be a bit monotonous, especially if we've got the same little, maybe 12 bar progression going round and round to just play the same thing all the time. We might want to mix things up a bit and either find different inversions or add little bits of melody. So coming to inversions first, that's where we can play the same shape but in a different position on the neck. And a way that we can do this, let's use an example of C7. Well, our famous C7 here is kind of no good because it rings out. I mean, if you're after that effect then it's fine, but if we're doing the more common staccato method, then we want to be using this C7, bar the 3rd fret and put a finger on the 4th fret of the C string. If we're going to find an inversion, then I quite like this one. It's really high up the neck. It's like a G7, but you play with the other 3 fingers and slide all the way up so that your pair of fingers is on the 7th fret, and add this finger onto the 5th fret of the G string. It's a really great shape. F, I might play a D7 shape but put it onto the 5th fret, and the same with G as well. G's there, it can also be there. And so I can mix and match and improvise on exactly what voicings I play and when. So it gets a little bit more interesting. See what I mean? It's much more interesting. And even if your banjo playing isn't the focus of the music, it's still nice to bring some variety. And often when you're playing these chord loops, you won't play them the same way twice, which is really nice. The other thing you can do, of course, is add little melodic ideas. If we take that same progression again, C7, I can add my finger on the 5th fret of the A string, and that gives us a C9. I can take it on and off. I can give it a sharp 9 as well, or a flat 9. Then F here. I can do a little suspension there. I'll turn it into a diminished chord. Basically just playing around with whatever fingers you have free, or if you don't have any free fingers, moving just one of them by 1 fret up or down, and you just create this momentary dissonance, and if you then resolve it back to the normal shape, then you'll have a much more interesting chord line as well. The final thing as well is if you're playing lots of bar chords and closed chords, where you've got all fingers on the strings, you get movable chords, so you can move the shape up and down as well. I quite like to have the chord shape move back a fret on the beat just before that chord hits. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just have a little bit of an experiment really, and just see what you can come up with. Another fact that's important if you're playing in a band with a bass player and a piano player, the piano should always sit right in the middle with the bass then going slightly lower than the pianist's left hand, and the banjo should typically be higher than the pianist's right hand. So if you've got a chunky uke like this, I mean this one has got so much access all the way up here, I've got so many more frets available to me, you can really go up to the high end on this one. Lots of big tenor banjos are tuned higher than ukuleles, so that range, while it's on the limit of the ukulele, it sits comfortably within a normal tenor banjo, and therefore if you listen to a lot of these old recordings, you'll often hear the banjos really quite high up in their register. So if you want to replicate that with a uke or a banjo uke, get something with a high range. With the strumming, on the other hand, you can use a pick or a finger. It doesn't really matter, but as long as you're accenting the offbeat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. A lot of this early jazz really has a syncopation feel on the offbeat, and with this muting, you keep that going on every beat, but then you're strumming just slightly harder to create an accent on the offbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Something that can even emphasize this effect further is instead of strumming louder on the offbeat, you do something a little bit quieter on the onbeat, i.e. only tap the first couple of strings. Instead of a full strum, just a little tap on the top two strings, the G and the C. You sort of imply the whole chord, but then you play the whole chord on the offbeat. So tap, strum, tap, strum, tap, strum, tap, strum. And that way you can get a nice contrast between loud and soft without really having to really give your banjo a good whack. And of course you can do this proportionally depending on what dynamic the piece is, whether it's a loud piece or quiet. Either way you've got that offbeat accent, which is just so typical of this genre. You also want to have a swung up strum as well. It's a little bit complicated topic to go into in this video, it deserves its own video really, but essentially put in the odd up strum every now and then. You don't really need to have lots of ups. In fact, generally, for the most part of a chorus, just down strums will suffice. The occasional up every now and then. But then when you get to the end of a section, it can be nice as a little fill to play just some more ups than you are otherwise. So if we take this chord progression, there's the occasional up strum, but it's mostly all downs. Now we're getting to the end of the progression, so to make it more interesting, I'm going to play lots more ups. Just downs. Kind of works in the same way as a little drum fill. Increase the rhythmic interest slightly at the end of a section to then come back in to re-establish the 1, 2, 3, 4 pulse when you go back to the repeat of that section. Finally, another tip I would give is you can sometimes play melodies on their own to accompany. So sometimes you get something like so you're sort of strumming the chord, but as you're doing so, you're picking out little bits of melody as well. Again, this is something that is worth dedicating an entire video to, and something that I'm going to definitely come back later, so make sure you're subscribed to this channel. But essentially, incorporating little bits of melody into your banjo playing on their own, not just included in the chord like we were doing earlier, but actually a picked melody as well, can work really nicely if you've got a bit of a reduction in the texture. To close, I would recommend getting one of these, the Real Dixieland book, and if you're playing with any horn players, then get the B-flat one as well. They're great, they're full of about 200 songs, all of this old traditional jazz style, so if you want a good bank of songs to draw from, then just pick yourself up one of those. They're from Hal Leonard. They're expensive, but definitely worth it. I hope that's given you some tips and advice. We've sort of taken the tradition of old-style banjo playing and applied it to the banjolele, looking at it from a ukulele perspective. Differences between the tenor banjo and the banjolele, which carries the ukulele tuning, is that the tenor banjo is tuned with a wider range, It's tuned in fifths, so a natural first position chord covers a lot wider range than the single octave that our first position C chord on a banjolele might. So a lot of the notes are often lower in the spectrum. I was saying earlier, a banjo is tuned so that it can really get to those high tones. So if you're going to emulate the banjo style, go up high. But at the same time, if you want to keep that ukulele style playing and those shapes that we're all familiar with, then do stay down here, because it's worth differentiating the banjolele between both the banjo and the ukulele. It is a valid instrument in its own right. We're not just trying to mimic. That said though, I hope I've given you a few tips on how to be stylistic of traditional jazz comping, and I hope you've enjoyed the lesson. Do let me know if you've got anything out of it by leaving a comment in the description, and give the video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're at it. Thank you very much. I've been Matthew Quilliam. Take care. Bye.